Going live, and we are live. Welcome back. This is episode 7, Followers of the Way, titled Getting Our House in Order. Today is a special day because, first of all, we have the whole squad together. Michael, GP, Aaron, good to have you all. And then there will be a special guest. So we're doing our regular episode that will take perhaps an hour, hour and a half. And then Bas van Os is joining us, the author of the Followers of the Way. Here to answer some questions, to reflect basically on the journey thus far. I mean, we're over halfway there this month, and the start of April is going to be busy for us. We're working toward Easter, so we're trying to put in quite a number of sessions. I think we'll do 3 in the coming...
Yeah, we have another one in a week.
Another one in a week, and then one at Easter around there. Is that correct? Okay. That's the plan. So really exciting stuff. I think we're all pretty deep into it. Aaron is doing Exodus 90, so he's holier than thou.
I'm doing Exodus 40. Let's
40.
be honest. Yeah, I'm not doing the whole 90 days. I'm doing the halfway point. Yeah.
But knowing Aaron up close, I can tell that it's bearing good fruit. So that's nice to see. I'm serious. So yeah, and then today we're talking about getting our house in order. I'll summarize the chapter quickly. So we read a couple Bible chapters. We did Peter 1, and you guys are going to have to help me here. Ephesians, 2 more. Philippians, and
Philemon, depending on how you...
Philemon is good with
and
me.
Colossians,
3 more. Okay. Getting our house in order. Basically, it speaks to Christ's reality in heaven. If I say that correctly, it's a bit of symbolic language. But it also speaks to how we deal with the transformed world that is now the reality of the early followers of the way. So what do you do with the social hierarchy? What do you do with slavery? What do you do with the hierarchy within households, getting our house in order? Men and women are supposed to be equal now. We're all children of God. But all this social hierarchy, all of this civilization, these social, let's say, dynamics are still in existence, and how did they deal with that? And then a reflection on us. How are we going to deal with this today? What does this mean for us? Yeah, I think there's a lot of fruitful passages that are going to come up today. I made some notes. I really enjoyed reading a lot of these texts. I think it's especially relevant today because we, of course, speak a lot about our social norms and how we relate to one another. And yeah, it's again interesting, as I've seen in many of these other chapters, how messy it was then and how messy it still is now. So lots to learn from. Aaron, we are again doing a Lectio Divina today, if I understand that correctly.
Yeah, I think so. The first letter of the bunch is the letter to the Philippians. At least the first one discussed in the chapter, and I think just useful context in general. It suggests that it was written in Rome when Paul was imprisoned. Pretty difficult. So I think that's just useful context to have for the Lectio Divina. It's pretty difficult stuff. And he's also going to have to reconcile both for himself, and Peter is also going to have to do it for the communities that he's talking to. Like, how should we conduct ourselves towards this persecution, let's say, that's happening, towards the suffering that is brought upon us? And then indeed also, like what you mentioned, Lucas, right? Like, so all the social structures, like how does that work? Like, is freedom something to be let's say, used opportunistically, or is freedom something else if we combine it with the message of the gospel? What does that mean for gender relations and slavery, etc.? Pretty confronting and difficult subject matters, probably. And you have to imagine that the letter to the Philippians is really probably, together with the letter to Philemon, the one that's undisputedly by Paul. Pretty much, like almost no one disputes it. And then the other letters, some dispute it. And then obviously the letter First Peter, Some people think that it was written by someone else entirely, but the letter itself seems to suggest that it was written by Silvanus or Silas, whose Greek was pretty good. So it is perfectly possible, at least conceivable, that it was written, let's say, by Peter, but through Silas or Silvanus. So all of that is just context that Paul is not doing so well. He's a little bit older, he's a little bit milder, so he's also a little bit less radical than he used to be. You'd expect him maybe to be sad, like yeah, spoilers, next chapter, he's gonna die. So um, he has rights to be very sad, but he seems to be very joyful. So he's gonna combine that and also indeed using that message towards the people he's talking to. Okay, as for the Lectio Divina, we're gonna do the one of the hymns because there's also a Christ hymn in Colossians, but we're gonna look at the Christ hymn that is central in um, Philippians. I'm gonna share my screen. Oh, I need to accept my request.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's try this again. Um, yeah, okay. You can probably see it now already.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're gonna I decided to add a little bit of the context of the first chapter where he's still clearly talking to an embodied and alive church community.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is really the central hymn. You can kind of see it by the shape almost
Sure.
of it. And then maybe some final remarks that are relevant here. And then I think the main focus here, which is on the next slide, but it's these sentences here that I think we're going to use for the Dominatio. And I kindly ask Michael to read it out loud. I'm not sure if you're able to read it. Maybe if I do like this.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
That works.
okay. Go ahead, Michael.
Okay. And you want me to start on verse 27 there?
Yeah, and then I'll go
Well,
quickly up. And if you perhaps like a general thing for the Lectio Divina, as per usual, um, all of us are listening as if we're sort of receiving a gift, as if every word could be a gift in and of itself. And that's also why we ask Michael to read it sort of mindfully. I'm not good at that. I always read things too slow, too fast, but please read them mindfully. And then all of us will listen attentively and yeah, consider what this could mean
great.
and what this could mean for us. So not merely for information, not forming an opinion about it, but letting it speak to us, listening to it for transformation. Okay, go ahead.
Great. Only live your life in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent and hear about you, I will know that you are standing firm in one spirit, striving side by side with one mind for the faith of the gospel, and are in no way intimidated by your opponents. For them, this is at work in you, enabling you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Do all things without murmuring and arguing, so that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, in which you shine like
Sorry,
stars.
I went. This is my bad. I'm so sorry. I went to.
Oh,
I was
sorry.
like, this is the end. That's my bad. So, for them,
If I had read
this
this more recently, I would have probably picked up on that. But
yeah, I was like, this is the end. Sorry.
so
You
for
are in no way
them,
intimidated by your opponents.
by
For
your
them,
opponents,
this
for
is
them, this is evidence of their destruction, but of your salvation. And this is God's doing. For he has graciously granted you the privilege not only of believing in Christ, but of suffering for him as well. Since you are having the same struggle that you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. If then there is any encouragement in Christ, any consolation from love, any sharing in the Spirit, any compassion and sympathy, make my joy complete. Be of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you look not to your own interests, but to the interests of others. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in human likeness. And being found in human form, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore God also highly exalted him and gave him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bend, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Therefore, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed me, not only in my presence, but much more now in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who is at work in you, enabling you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Do all things without murmuring and arguing, so that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, in which you shine like stars in the world. It is by your holding fast to the word of life that I can boast on the day of Christ that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. But even if I am being poured out as a libation over the sacrifice and the offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. And in the same way, you also must be glad and rejoice with me.
Thank you, Michael. And apologies for my mistake.
Okay.
So for the next round, we're going to focus on the hymn itself. And then I thought specifically these sentences. I even had to change one word so we can read it like one sentence. And at the start, feel free to look, but perhaps at some point you might even want to close your eyes or something like that to really focus on what these words evoke in you as you speak. As you say them mindfully, and perhaps place a different emphasis each time that it's your turn.
Can I just ask one more time the difference between, what is it, evoke, provoke?
Yeah,
Invoke?
but that's later. So I'll state it then. But
No,
I can
to
explain it
it?
now. But
Okay.
we're now
Sure.
only going to do
Sure.
the ruminatio of the one sentence. So I'll start off, and then Michael can go second, and then Lucas, and then GP, and then we'll do that 4 times. Though he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave.
Though he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave.
Though he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave.
Though he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave.
Though he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave.
Though he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave.
Though he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave.
Though he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave.
Though he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave.
Though he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave.
Though he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave.
Though he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave.
Though he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave.
So he was in the form of God. He emptied himself, taking the form of a slave.
Though he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave.
Though he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave.
Okay, I guess I'll leave it here for a little bit, that you can read the hymn, but at the same time, I think it's really good to start listening to and responding to the contributions that others in our group make, because we've allowed the text to speak to us by reading it, and now we're gonna hopefully hear how it's working through us. So there's a difference indeed, as Lucas was asking about. You can say how the text or this line evoked something in you. So a particular emotion came up. Something was moved in you, for instance. But it could also be that something that you felt provoked by something that was said. I have to be careful though, because that doesn't mean that being provoked gives automatic license to state an opinion about it. But nonetheless, it's good to be honest about when we feel provoked, you know? So either evoked or provoked, or more generally, the way this text spoke to me was, um, or what was touched in me, for instance. And always with the means, and that's the final one, but always with the in the means of invoking, let's say, the spirit behind the text. So, for instance, Paul, who wrote this, to sort of try to get a sense of his perspective as he was writing this down, either using this hymn that was in existence, or using the same poetic gift that he had in 1 Corinthians 13. What was his way of looking at the world in writing this down? So try to invoke that spirit while focusing on what it evokes or provokes in you as you're reading this. I'll start off. I guess the text evokes in me an utter sense of awe at, I kind of get this sense of reality sort of visually being stretched as far as it can be. It's like these are the extents, but they're also pulled together at the same time. Yeah, Michael, and then Lucas, and then GP.
Yeah, what this evokes in me is the malleability of Christ, be able to change forms from God, which, you know, might not even have like a corporeal, like physical form, you know, much more of a kind of a formless form, but being able to descend down and assume the most humble position. Yeah, and just the remarkability of that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we're gonna have we could do this 4 rounds.
Okay.
So yeah, so just so you know, that if you have more thoughts, you're free to share them also in the next one.
Yeah, what this evokes in me is I feel in awe with the paradox of power, what it means to have power.
Thank you.
What it evokes in me is the sense of absolute overflowing abundance.
Yeah. I'm moved by the thought of someone in the form of God emptying himself and trying to get almost like a phenomenological sense of what that's like, if that's even possible for me to approximate.
Mm. Yeah, there are things coming up that are probably more relevant for the next round, but just the image that GP shared of the overflowing abundance just makes me think of like emptying a cup to be able to have more liquid poured in. And there's a Zen koan. It's like the only one that I remember that speaks to that. And yeah, just this image of this like utter emptying to have overflowing abundance and that kind of paradox.
Yeah, what I'm moved by is just how unbelievable, really unbelievable and wild the idea is that God became man.
It evokes in me, from what Michael said, it's got a strange resonance with Taoism, I think, in the sense that sort of the absolute takes on this form of lowness or emptiness.
Yeah, and I'm also reminded of this loneliness also in the social sense, right? This just the social classes and just what is the low social class here? Um, being slavery, and yeah, just how radical that is. That's something that is praised, and what that could mean. That God becoming the slave potentially being exalted. That was perhaps previously unimaginable.
Mm. Yeah, it reminds me of when Jesus is talking, I think he's talking to his disciples about um like not being consumed with the the breads and the water of this world, but to feed on his bread and his water, and to empty oneself and to take the position of a slave. You're sacrificing a lot of earthly possessions and comforts, but like you're ultimately making room for like an utter reliance on God.
What I'm moved by is the idea of obedience. It, for me, sounds like a freedom of some sorts and a profound challenge to get into.
What it evokes in me is the sense of grace. God makes the first move.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm also thinking of the image of Adam, also shaped in God's image. Kind of feel that Paul is, yeah, making a relevant comparison here, where perhaps the equality with God was exploited and just this sense of the meaning of this cosmic event happening again and it turning out in this way. And therefore almost like a new creation and what that means cosmically. This is like a new creation story, the new Genesis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was struck immediately by the word form. And when I think about that and think about that in the in the form of like casts, like physical casts, or I don't know, like kind of figures or models or mannequins or something. I think of like how that, like, to say he was in the form of God, it it almost makes it seem like that is one way, that is one vessel or one way in which he appears in the world, but he also has this ability to assume another form. Like, these identities are not absolute or not totalizing. Um, and yeah, that is kind of like awe-inspiring, that ability for God to do that.
What I'm moved by is the mystery of this event, you can call it, the way God acts in history. I just hear Mudley from the background.
Interrupting. I'll mute myself.
What this provokes in me is questions around what does this actually mean for the human Jesus? What does this mean for his psychology? What does it mean to be God or be in the form of God and yet also be obedient to God?
Yeah, these are really good first associations. And I think then for the next round, because these were, let's say, mostly short sentences, like we had a sentence come up, and now feel free to take a little bit longer to maybe develop a thought. For instance, something from personal memory, if you have something at all that it could be related to. Um, so this is maybe your moment if you want to be a little bit more autobiographical and perhaps speak a little bit more how it relates to yourself. Obviously, we're trying to invoke the spirit behind the text, but this could be this moment of perhaps relating it to something of personal memory. Feel free to take maybe a minute or 2 minutes for this point. We're only going to do this for one round. I haven't really thought of anything yet. Does anyone want to start? Let's see.
Yeah, I can start.
Sure.
Um, it it kind of evokes two strong uh memories. One is the Zen koan that I mentioned, but I'll mention the other one. So I'm in a men's circle, and the way it's structured is each month there's like a kind of like an archetypal theme that we are working with. And this month's theme is the month of the overflowing cup. And it's kind of this image and this idea of like cultivating abundance in kind of all areas of our life, and noticing where the kind of choke points, or the you know, kind of the dam walls in our ability to be that vessel of overflowing love and courage and strength. Um, and something that has come up is this kind of connection between humility and sacrifice and surrender and abundance. And, you know, this kind of seeming paradox, but also this, yeah, like, just as I've been reflecting on it, like, when I feel grateful, I feel like sharing that a lot more than when I'm consumed with my own, goals and projects and I want to do this and that. I actually get quite drained. Um, and so this emptying into like sacred abundance, even if maybe there's lack of abundance in other areas that, culture deems like worthwhile to strive towards, um, has been really alive in me recently. And yeah, I think it's just such like a trip to kind of wrap your head around that. And that God who had, all the power in the world and, could have gone out on some crusade and tried to, conquer Rome or whatever, or take down Caesar, um, like led in a completely antithetical way to like kind of rational, thought. And yeah, that is a model for all of us. Um, is pretty remarkable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have a like maybe as much of a personal memory. I very much appreciated the insight that you shared. I think perhaps a little bit what it does remind me is, let's say, the best moments when like when I'm in the role of, for instance, a mentor or a teacher. Um, uh, Sorry, I'm just getting a message from my Exodus 40 pals. I was saying that I had this conversation and they're like, "Oh, can we join?" So maybe they'll join. But anyways, it's Job from the PVK channel. You might know him. Um, sorry. I was thinking like in those leadership roles that, there's this, it feels like this demand that is so difficult to execute well, where the moment you feel like you have this authority, that you kind of know, like, okay, I could really, use my authority in sort of wrong ways. Like I could sort of be this power maniac. And to then sort of do the opposite, where you're not merely like, yeah, but I'm gonna be cool about it. I'm still gonna use my authority, but I'm not gonna, go overboard with it. But to go to the like complete other extreme, where you start caring, where you start self-sacrificing, ultimately, like so much, um, as a means sort of being sort of a good leader. And I think that's sort of what you find here, the sense that someone indeed, like, was also described by the associations that were shared, to have this power to go the opposite route, um, and then at the same time, yeah, to just go to the lowest possible place. It's just something that maybe I've had glimpses of, and it is beautiful. That you feel like, okay, and the people also check on you, like, are you okay? Like, are you not doing too much? But you kind of feel that is the same process by which you could sort of potentially be elevated in this different sense than you would expect if you were thinking of, let's say, more earthly power terms. And that's sort of the movement that I find beautifully sort of developed in here, that he's sort of like in the form of God, emptied himself, becoming a slave, and therefore he was exalted. So you get this beautiful sort of chiasm. Um, and I try to relate it to personal experience, but honestly, it's something that is unimaginable to live up to. So yeah, indeed, his psychology, that's a question that I also have, just like GP.
Yeah.
Lucas, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. What it reminds me of personally is this idea of kind of starting over, emptying oneself, becoming nothing. I do that on a small scale. For example, becoming or learning something new completely from scratch. you guys know that I love football. And whenever I feel comfortable in a position, I will completely change my position and then learn anew. Or in my work, when I feel comfortable with a certain, I don't know, position or certain thing you can do in the company, I'd like to try something else and do that again and again. And I do feel that the fruits of that are so much more powerful than if you just, I don't know, keep getting marginally better at whatever you're an expert at. I think there's just a secret of profound joy and fruitfulness in becoming as little as you possibly can be. And there's a profound sense of connection that I feel when you do that with other people as well. Become a beginner, let's say. Yeah.
I struggle to find a personal sort of memory or experience, probably because this is so like deep or fundamental or theological. But at the same time, I think that pattern could be applied to many things, in the sense of it's the difference between someone who has power and authority and grasps it, or exploits it for sort of petty, selfish ends, versus someone who overflows. And so my translation, the ESV, actually says that he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. So a slightly different sense than exploited, but very related. Someone who's grasping power is sort of implicitly not so powerful. They're at least questioning their power. And so this to me is the pattern of someone who has excellence and authority and power, but kind of uses that in an engaged way for the good of other people or for the good of the thing that they're supposed to be upholding. And so, yeah, this really speaks to that for me. It also evoked a memory from a Nietzsche book. Maybe Aaron will appreciate this. It's just a brief passage. This is from Thus Spoke Zarathustra of the Three Evil Things, that the lonely height may not always be solitary and sufficient to itself, that the mountain may descend to the valley and the wind of the heights to the lowlands. And so Nietzsche's speaking about how it's natural for the heights to sort of overflow and want to go down. And so that resonates with me as well. And you could see those two books as being sort of in opposite sides of the spectrum, but I think that they may converge on that point. So yeah, that's it from me.
Yeah, that'd be beautiful. Yeah, and perhaps for later, not for now, but the point of grasping, David Bentley Hart spends an entire footnote on sort of how to translate that. So something we can talk about definitely. This final round is free, so now it's just sort of it's free play. So that means there's no order anymore. You're just able to respond to each other's insights, and sort of play off each other in this sense of like as if we're, let's say, jamming out to each other, all playing an instrument, and invoking the sense of dialogos that is possible there. And obviously we can transition to discussing the other letters because this is the start of the chapter anyways, and the start of the start of the letter to the Philippians too. So we can go on, but let's stick with what was said first. Who wants to take it away?
Take it off, Aaron. I want to see your body.
Yeah, sorry. Wrong saying. Yeah, there's so much like it is. This is really like I noticed that I'm glad to hear you agree, let's say, Gabriel, that it's a difficult passage to relate to personal memory, um, which is probably also good in some sense, though I'm I'm interested indeed to also maybe use this as part of the reflection that we're going to have at the end of this with Bas, because indeed it is really difficult to make sort of what to make of a psychology of a human being who got this sense, and even like the fact that this is like a hymn, this means, so either Paul did write it, in which case he's again sort of confirmed as a poetic genius to the same extent that we already saw in 1 Corinthians 13. And I'm speaking of specifically this hymn. Like I don't doubt that he wrote the rest of the letter. Or indeed the hymn was around already, which is just fascinating to me because that means that the earliest Christian communities and assemblies that they used this hymn, that they sang this, which is just like it feels like a extremely deep and profound theological insight. Though obviously it's difficult to understand what is meant by being in the form of God, especially because saying like it's also the same form of being a slave. Um, but yeah, I just find it like this cosmic image. Like I see this sort of coming down from heaven and being exalted back up into heaven. So you see that in front of me, and at the same time, I try to sort of get rid of that image at the same time because it has, this two worlds association. Even though reading Paul, I get the sense that the cosmos is actually, it's like a monism nonetheless of sorts. Like there's no dualism really. Like it's for us post Cartesians that we make this duality between like, okay, heaven up there and earth down here. Um, but I'm getting this sense that it's like, yeah, okay, heaven is the deepest core, let's say, of reality, but not necessarily somewhere else, if it's space at all. So like there's so much to focus on here, and I don't know where to start. Um, but thank you all for sharing. Indeed, the notions of power and the corrupting force of that and the risk.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah.
I was just thinking of that mystery. It messes with me of God is beyond time, but he enters into time. I don't know if you guys have any insights on that, but maybe I'm not supposed to make sense of it. And then what I do understand is incarnating as the lowest. It seems counterintuitive, but if you look back on it, that's what had to happen. Of course, he couldn't have been a king. Or does it also mean that the time that he entered the world, did it have to be at that time? Was that a specific moment in time that necessitated the coming of God? That's some thoughts that I have.
Yeah, that also that question messes with my head too, because it's like in some sense God has always been present. Even if you go back to like the Old Testament before the coming of Christ. And so yeah, like it's like was there a specific moment where Christ had to descend down and become man, um, as opposed to just having the presence of God? Um, yeah, it's hard to know. I'm also just thinking I'm in a class right now on T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets, and last meeting we read Burnt Norton, and it starts like kind of the whole poem is about time, or at least one of the main themes is about time. And there's the line like time past and time present are both found in time future, um, which is just like, what does that even mean? But it is this kind of, and I think it is interesting, and I would be curious to hear, well, anyone's thoughts, but GP earlier mentioned Taoism. Some people in that lecture were talking about, kind of Eastern and indigenous ideas of like the circularity of time, like the universality of time, the non-linearity of time. Um, and Yeah, it's left me with a lot to think. So maybe there's something relevant in there, uh, connecting back to this.
I want to start by just sort of thinking about what the verses that we read actually might mean. And I'm just going by the translation before me and what we read, so I haven't done any sort of scholarly research into this. But the form of God seems like a bit of an ambiguous phrase. It doesn't seem to be saying precisely God himself. It could be insinuating that, but it could also be saying something different. But it is interesting to see such a strongly, almost, at least almost Trinitarian statement from so early in Christianity. So it says that he was in the form of God. It implies he had equality with God. And then it says that he emptied himself and took the form of a servant. So the form is repeated there, which suggests that, well, it could suggest that if he truly, absolutely became the nature of a servant, then maybe he had the nature of God. But it could also suggest that he just appeared as a servant, and likewise he appeared as God beforehand. So there's a separation between his nature and his form or his appearance. Um, and then interestingly, that he was exalted by God, who bestowed on him the name that is above every name. So that's interesting phrasing because it doesn't sort of say he returned to God's nature or God returned him to himself or something like that, but that he was exalted, which seems to partake more of the the sort of more of the human view of Jesus, that Jesus achieved something or attained something and was lifted up, and he didn't sort of have it before. And then the name that is above every name, the next verse makes you think that name is Jesus, but traditionally that name is the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God. And so, which is sort of paraphrased in our Bibles in the Old Testament as Lord with capitals. So God gave him his name, which again suggests a very, very close association with God, but doesn't necessarily suggest an identity with God. So yeah, all of this is very interesting. And then, of course, it says Jesus Christ is Lord. And obviously, Lord can just mean like a Lord, a human Lord, or it could mean the Lord. And because this isn't written in Hebrew, it's written in Greek, I guess we don't know for sure which one of those meanings is primary. Whereas if it was in Hebrew, you would have the word, the four-letter word there to tell you. Anyway, those are just my thoughts and no conclusions, just sort of noticings and questions. I'm tempted to talk about time, but I don't know how close we would stay to the text.
Yeah.
So I'm going to forego that, I think.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to respond to this part first, and then we can elaborate on time a little bit later, which is funny. But anyways, yeah, I so I totally agree with everything you said. So like the whole reading, I was also like sort of what do you call it, like oscillating like between these two sentences. Like, okay, is this sort of God giving this authority to Jesus, the human, or or is it, let's say, indeed there's this sense in which Jesus also already sort of pre-existed in some sense as God? Because the one sentence which you did not mention, or at least which I did focus on, which was the second part of verse 6. So he was in God's form, but also he did not deem being on equal terms with God a thing to be grasped. And that aspect that suggested that he was on equal terms with God, right? At least that's what it says in my translation. Which
Yeah,
is not necessarily to say indeed like, oh, so therefore he was God. It's like, no, he
yes,
was on
yeah.
equal terms with him, but also it also doesn't necessarily easily suggest like, oh, he was just, an average human being like everyone else, and then he was later exalted. Like he was
Mhm.
already on equal terms. So I'm really struggling with that. And then indeed, like what you mentioned, the final sentences, like we're actually reading through the book of Isaiah now. It's like literally taken from there, but then, like then it's God speaking through Isaiah, saying like, every knee shall bow, shall bend, and every tongue shall confess that God is Lord. Um, so there is this sense in which, like, if it's used in this context to say that Jesus, the anointed, is Lord for the glory of God the Father, it's not saying like God is now replaced by Jesus, Jesus is higher than God, but also it is sort of using that context of saying, well, this was used in reference to God in the Old Testament, and now indeed in reference to Jesus. So so I don't know exactly, like, and I guess that's the potential of the proto Trinitarian view, because there's not really a sense of the Spirit here, but that in some sense the God um, aspect is higher or more whole than Jesus the Father or the Spirit, right? And that in that sense, there could still be this separation of sorts, because the notion of the Father is only put at the very end and not halfway through, and also earlier. So yeah, those are some thoughts. I'm curious what this means for you. Michael has his hand up. Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I just have the NIV in front of me. So the translation is a little bit different, but um to kind of go back to something GP mentioned about the word form, that not necessarily insinuating like uh direct, what am I trying to say? Like to say the form of God is not necessarily saying God himself. It's like uh like later on it says being made into human likeness. So like a likeness with God, a likeness with, in the NIV it says the very nature of a servant. That's the language that's used instead of form. Um I thought that was very interesting. That there is this seemingly this kind of distance or separation, not necessarily to say that Jesus embodying the nature of a servant or the nature of God is qualitatively different than to just be that thing. But for me, it gives this sense that there is flexibility within identity, um, that he is able to be more than one thing. Um, and I also got the sense, Aaron, that there is this duality between Jesus, the emptied slave, and God. Because like the first two lines is like, who being in very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. So there's this like Jesus, God on equal grounds, but that not leading to temptation or leading to this hierarchy. I then struggle to put that into the context of the Trinity. Um, if if each part, God the Father, God the Son, the Holy Spirit, are all ultimately one, this, like, I don't know, this hymn seems to really hone in on um kind of Jesus's role as distinct from God. So I guess what I'm struggling with is like when God empties himself and becomes a servant, um, what uh, phenomenologically presence of is the presence of God in that servant still the same as before?
yeah. It's a good question.
Yeah, like is the emptied God who becomes a servant or a slave, are they on equal, uh, like what would it be fair to compare that to just a slave in Judea at that
Yeah,
time?
Yeah, that's the
or
question.
you know, because we've been talking about like the humility and the awe around the humbleness of God being able to do that. Um, but if he's if he still knows like this is part of the plan and the arc for me to ultimately gain redemption
Yeah.
and be able to die for the sins of humanity. I'm not saying it makes that easier
No, yeah, it
than
does.
someone who's just born into poverty, but
Yeah,
there is a certain sense of comfort
of
in
course.
like this is ultimately purposeful, whereas most slaves don't see their lives as part of that grander narrative
Yeah, I think Jesus
until
has
obviously
to.
they have a relationship with God, maybe.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think Jesus has to have faith, and I think he cannot have certainty. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a proper sacrifice. I think
Hmm.
that, and I think you see that in him, especially at the end, of course, when he screams out in pain and lamenting having been left by God in some way. So I think there must be some sort of, yeah. I think you need to kind of accept your death and your doom before you can be resurrected in general. There's this moment in every story that contains a resurrection theme, where the resurrection only really happens after the character surrenders completely. And you cannot surrender completely if you already know that you're going to be, exalted.
I don't know. I see what you mean, but at the same time, it seems that it's conceivable, like we've been reading the fact that like the Gospel of Mark has already at least like has existed now at this point for a couple decades. I'm not sure if it's, circulating, but I think there was a suggestion by Bus that this was on the yeah, it said like, where did Paul get this hymn about a pre-existent Jesus? And does this idea perhaps arise in the gospel according to Mark 12, verse 35 to 37? So there's this suggestion maybe that Paul's getting some ideas here, uh, directly or indirectly from the Gospel of Mark. And obviously in the Gospel of Mark, it is said a few times that Jesus sort of, is stating what's going to happen.
Yeah, he
The
knows,
Son of
but he
Man.
has faith that it's going to happen. But
Yeah,
he's struggling with that faith. He's
yeah,
not
I
certain
think
of
so.
that faith. I don't think that's the case. But yes, of course, and
Yeah.
he of course predicts his resurrection in some sense. But I think at some point he just surrenders. He dies
Hmm.
Yeah.
completely. His spirit is down. And
Yeah.
whose wouldn't be if you? I mean, if you
No, of
watch
course.
watch
No,
the
Yeah.
Passion,
I
it's
think
pretty rough stuff.
that's the good part.
Yeah.
This was
Yeah.
by sorry, go ahead, Michael.
No, I was just quickly, I think that's kind of at the core of my question is like in in the crucifixion and the ult because I agree like with you, Lucas, like you 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 kind of have to believe that, yeah, like I mean you kind of have to face the Nietzschean abyss to create the create the emptiness for the Spirit of God to enter you. And so in that moment when Jesus cries out, like it seems like he is fully embodying the form of the slave there and
Yeah.
doesn't have the form of God in that moment. Um, and does that, I don't know, does that break the Trinity in some sense for him to be in that moment like fully man? I don't know. Is it even a worthwhile question to
Well, yeah, it's I'm kind
like
of like exactly like the
labor over?
Trinity. Yeah, the Trinity was sort of, it's still in development here. So,
Hmm.
I don't feel equipped yet to, but maybe like, but to sort of state like, yeah, it can be perfectly defended. Like you can see over here, like, well, I guess it wasn't development, but that's not to say that, all of it just sort of flawlessly, harmoniously adds up to this thing. Like, no, I think you're right to see some tensions that you point out. Yeah.
Just quick in between, Aaron. Did you want to get your guys on at some point? Like, is that
No,
something
I think they were joking.
Okay.
Like,
Just making sure there's space for it, because if we do the reflection, maybe it's not the best. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
no, I mean, unless you want me to tell Job that he can join,
Oh, it's
then
okay. It's just he needs
yeah.
to feel welcome,
yeah.
and this is the moment, as opposed to when we have the reflection, I think.
Okay.
I just listened to his
I'll
or
check.
part of his
His
combo
thing
with PVK, and that was my intro to him.
Interesting.
And really liked, really
I
liked what he had to say.
I just yeah, he's great. And we are each other's anchors for the Access thing, so we do a daily check-in. But tonight I was not available. What was I gonna say? Yeah, sorry, I'm also switching in between
You can
Dutch and
recollect.
English.
I'm curious about GP because he's been awfully quiet, and this is pretty pretty paradoxical stuff. So I want to hear a philosophical mind speak on it.
Well, it's tricky to jump into this for that reason, first of all, but also because I don't tend to think about it primarily in this way.
Yeah.
I tend to think about Jesus primarily as human, which is not to say I'm closed off to the idea of him being divine. But I just feel that once you start down that direction, you kind of entangle yourself in all these paradoxes that we're starting to come up against. And so I feel it's most useful for me to think of him as a human, an incredibly holy human, and then kind of proceed from there. And so partly because I'm a human too, and so I can relate to that much more. But then thinking about him simultaneously being God, yeah, that's much more paradoxical, I think.
Yeah.
Hello, Joe.
Hi.
Hey. Yeah, I understand. Do you have any thoughts about Philippians 2, Job, that you want to share?
I don't know. I don't go get it. Hang on.
Oh yeah, there's something off with your audio. Like there seems to be this Zoom noise, which is appropriate for Zoom. But
Let me switch mics. Microphone.
There we go. That works.
Yeah.
This should be better.
that's good.
I
But
have no idea if my camera's working because I don't have.
it's working. But while you're looking it up, I just want to respond to what GP was saying. That like, yeah, it is. That's also why I think I struggle with this. Like, I don't think we've entered this yet, which is why I thought like, okay, this could be a good intro to the rest of the chapter. But honestly, it's so radical that it's like this whole thing. It seems like we can also have like, let's say, an aporia moment and just sort of leave it and then return to it as the theme returns to us. Even though I'm still curious what Job has to say. But I totally agree. Like, how do we square this with what we've gotten to know so far? Like, this really does seem to be this first very strong statement of this divine status in some ways, but yeah, at the same time, doubtful. And yeah, I'm not necessarily worried about squaring it with the Trinity yet. Maybe later. Not at the moment. Job, your thoughts?
What are you fulcruming on? 2 verse 6?
Yeah, so it's mostly the hymn. So 2 verse 6 mostly indeed, and then 2, 6, 7. Let's say 6, 7, and then up until 11. Yeah.
Well, it's one of those controversial passages, right? As you obviously know. I am very bad at these sort of non-concrete questions. Like, what do you think about it? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think about it. I think it's. I don't know. I think Paul's just sincere. You know, he seems to be laying out some form of Christology. It's and at the same time, there's a sort of a vision in it of the final days of the return of Christ. Not sure what else I could make of it, or that you haven't already said.
No, we're also considering, because like this is the first of the 5 books that we're discussing, to potentially go on. But maybe there's more, like either About Time or Lucas or Michael. I was also like, just like, feel free to return to this, but the whole passage we read, like it started off obviously stating, talking about, praying for them, and it stated some matters also near the end about being stars, sort of in the shining like stars in the cosmos, which I liked, but also especially, which I thought was interesting, which we haven't discussed, is the relationship to joy, which we haven't talked about. And I'm honestly like, I'm curious what you think the kind of joy is that's being expressed here. Is it like this joy, like, oh, you're being persecuted and there are violent attacks, let's say, against you, and yeah, just make the best of it, let's say, and therefore be joyful. So it's like this pragmatic sense of joy, or is this like this genuine joy that Paul is feeling, like, oh, now this is like this is a sign that sort of, as the chapter also said, like that evil is on its last legs, and therefore I experience joy because I believe that this is true. So I'm kind of curious how you interpret joy, but maybe you want to say more about the passage first, or Job, or whatever.
Boy, I'm not used to being asked questions like this. I just think the whole way that I'm totally not going to engage what you're saying, by the way.
That's fine. That's fine. I don't expect you to. I
What
know
I
you too well.
what I think is interesting is that he's kind of he's got this sort of teaching mode going on, and until like verse 4, and then he goes to be together like this, in this gezindheid. Laat daarom die gezindheid die nu zijn, die ook in Christus Jezus was. I don't know how that translates. But anyway, verse 5. And then he goes in this whole sort of Christological side route, almost on a tangent of like, that's who Christ was and that's what God did. And then, and by the way, therefore, my beloved, as you've always been obedient, not only when I've been around, but also when I'm not here.
Yeah.
Work your salvation in fear and trembling, huh? Kierkegaard comes to mind.
Kierkegaard does come to mind. Yeah.
But it's interesting. He goes in this little like this vision of Christ, and then he goes, right, yeah, be like that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of wild.
Let's get back to it. But that's also why I'm puzzled by it, because I think GP also was struggling a little bit with, this sort of human Jesus, and this seems like a very divine Jesus, which I mean makes sense later on, but we've obviously discussed it sort of from the start, so we're still getting the sense of perhaps a more human Jesus with a human psychology, etc. And then it seems difficult to relate to this. But Paul is explicitly asking, indeed, in verse 5, as you stated, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Jesus, who, being, in the form of God, which is just like radical. It's like, that same mindset, when he descended from heaven and took on the form of a slave. And then it's like, oh, that seems like a pretty high ask,
Yeah. Like, oh, you church folks, why aren't you like Christ a bit more? Like, just...
Yeah, exactly. Anyways.
But I think he mainly means... Wait, no, I don't actually know. So this word that he uses in verse 5, gezindheid, how is that translated?
Mindset, I think. The same mindset.
Which
be of the same mind. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a callback to the rest of part 2, maybe? Like, it seems to come out of nowhere, because verse 4
Job,
is
you appear a little bit unprepared for this session. It's almost like you haven't read the chapter and all the 5 books over the last week.
No, well, I mean, you guys gave me a link. I'm willing to engage, honestly.
Oh, that's good.
Look, anyway, do you want me to keep going, or should I just be quiet?
No, I was joking. Please keep going.
I can't believe you'd make a joke at my expense. I should have at least drank a liter of milk to prepare for this.
It's like Lucas.
Yeah, take
Like,
some of Lucas's.
it's the first thing I saw coming into this cast. This Cameron just
I
chugging
know.
this carton of milk like a total heathen. Uh,
No, but
The
go
last
on.
meeting was even worse. It was like 5 full glasses that it was just one gulp. It was
It's the
truly
same.
amazing.
It's the same. It's just more
I was like
civilized.
I was like he's going in for it again.
Yeah, it's like we were reading about 40 days in the desert, and Lucas was just like pouring glass after glass, just like, yeah, I totally understand what Jesus must have been going through.
He'd
My
already come out of
goodness.
his 40 days. Or
Fair
this was
enough.
his Fat Tuesday. This was
Yes,
Fat
yeah,
Tuesday.
yeah, exactly. Just like cheat day.
Every day is Fat Tuesday, my guys.
anyway,
Anyways,
Paul doesn't really seem to. He just first five, therefore,
mhm.
and then that seems to just be the being of one mind that he refers to in the start of two,
Yeah.
like the first four verses, and then like yeah, kind of like Christ, remember?
Hmm.
Uh, then totally doesn't make sense, and then therefore my loved, like blah, 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 verse 12, and then he goes on and be nice and be without blame, without blemish,
Hmm.
and stay with the word, etc., etc. And then he's basically, oh, by the way, if I get killed, well, I'm still happy.
Yeah,
It's a
exactly.
wild letter.
And that's like my question to anyone, really, but also to you, Job, is like, does he mean genuinely happy? Is it like this pragmatic happiness? Like, yeah, it's good to be happy because that will make things better, or do you think he is genuinely rejoicing as he is in prison?
The way I see it is like he's I think he's drawing strength and joy from Christ. Like I always take, whenever there's an exclamation point, I'm like, okay, someone's like joyful in some way.
Yeah.
And the line, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Like I think he's like, isn't this like crazy? Like, isn't this unbelievable? Like what he was able to,
Hmm.
what Jesus was able to do and endure. Um, and like I think it's one of those like when you're in your really low moments and you're drawing strength from people who have endured,
Hmm.
I guess, far more than you have, or like just endured great things. um but I don't know, that feels kind of distinct from like
Yeah.
Paul generating his own, like I think he'd still rather be a free man than in prison. But I think he's just trying to get into the psychology of Jesus, or to
Yeah.
to try and embody that walk in his own way. I don't
I'm
know.
curious, like, because now I'm really thinking of the final scenes, let's say, of the Gospel of Mark, that, like, oh God, why have you forsaken me? Like, I'm curious if Paul was kind of like, oh, you know, that part of Jesus I don't like. I want him to be happy throughout his suffering, almost like that Paul really seems to affirm the happiness over everything, which makes sense
Well,
because he understands Jesus to go through this voluntarily.
yeah,
Sorry,
well,
yeah.
he's also post-resurrection, so I think it's different.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough, but still, like, it was still known to be this most ridiculous sort of, not ridiculous, embarrassing and
Scandalous.
awful,
Yeah,
scandalous sort of punishment,
of
so it's
course.
not like now it's all good. Um,
Simone Weil actually says something about this topic. She says that something to the effect of Jesus was the only one to experience, well, not the only one in history, but Jesus experienced true affliction. But the
mm,
followers of Jesus that were martyred, they didn't, because they really were martyred with joy. Um,
yeah. Wow.
and
Mm,
that's
Okay.
because they really, truly believed that they were about to be with Jesus.
Yeah.
But
mm,
Jesus really, truly doubted that the Father
hmm
was for him.
Yeah,
And
that's
so for
radical.
her, what Jesus achieves is far more significant than what the martyrs do. So
Yeah, it is true, right? Like even like right before this passage that we're discussing, that he says like, yeah, I'm kind of torn. I would also be okay with dying, being with Jesus, but at the same time, I think it's better if I still, provide some work for the assemblies first. I think that's better. Then I
Yeah.
spread his word. But he's like, yeah, but honestly, pretty good deal. Like to be with Jesus now. Yeah, that's wild.
Do you think he means that? I mean, I think he has faith, but he doesn't. I think there's always that slave part of you that Jesus goes through as well.
Hmm.
You know, you try to speak of your highest spirit, especially if it's being documented in something so profound and important. But
Yeah,
I'm sure he had his low moments too.
for sure,
I
for
see.
sure. No, it seems like it. But I'm also like what I'm also touched by is like that in the chapter it is said, and it is stated, I think later in one of the letters, that some people testified against him, like some of his fellow Christians, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like sort of again re-emphasizing this idea that Paul was this kind of like radical, wild Christian who some were really into, but also others were kind of annoyed by, and so he must have felt sadness, you know, like also that he like that not everyone seemed to understand what his project was all about.
Hmm.
Don't they kind of kick him out in First Corinthians?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's why he changes his tone in the later letter.
So Philippians, is that a late letter?
It's relatively late. It's like so now we're right before pretty much the final letter, potentially by Paul. It's even like the last letter by Paul, I think, that is undisputedly Paul's, together with the letter to Philemon.
Because he is in prison, right?
Yeah, in Rome.
It's
He's
kind of
imprisoned in
wild
Rome.
because he is saying about like, oh, by the way, I'll send Timothy your way, and
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
I'll get to see
He's
you
in
as
Pablo
well.
Escobar prison.
Yeah.
He's having
No,
a
no,
nice,
no, no.
nice
So
steak.
he's not in Pablo Escobar prison, but I think the chapter did say that like a lot of evidence and testimony needed to be gathered. So he kind of had this sense like,
Sure.
you know, I have time. But yeah, it is wild. But also like he says like, yeah, it doesn't really matter. Like anyways, the gospel's being spread, and whether for whether by good people or bad people, it's being spread either way. So yeah.
How does GP feel about Paul now? Because I remember we discussed it a couple times, a couple episodes before, whether or not we like him or not. So I'm curious after
I mean,
this letter.
I like him and I dislike him, right? Like
You
it's not
stated
like
that you love him, remember?
I love him. I love
Yeah.
him and I hate him. No, I definitely appreciate him. And like clearly, I mean, he was a visionary in like all senses of that word. Like he saw visions, but he also sort of saw a fundamentally different kind of worldview. And like, you know, loved very, very deeply God and his fellow man. So, you know, I don't want to denigrate him too much. But what clashes with me is his personality. And to maybe move on a little bit,
You don't like his
sure.
jokes?
His
What?
jokes, yeah. You don't
Jokes,
like
yeah.
his jokes as a Oh.
I mean, I know this is sort of not the main point of Philemon, which is more that issue of slavery. But when I was reading Philemon, I just couldn't help notice these two parts of his personality continuing to sort of clash with each other in the sense that he's putting himself forward as just giving the slave back to what's the name of the owner again?
Oh, to Philemon. The slave is called
To
Onesimus.
Philemon.
Yeah,
Slave is Onesimus. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Back to Philemon, just, you know, to sort of freely choose what to do in regard to him. And sorry, I don't know if you can hear my child in the background. Hopefully it's
Just-
filtering it up.
Yeah, almost perfectly outfiltered. Yeah.
Okay,
Go
cool.
Unlike
But at the
Job's wife.
same at the same time, he's kind of implicitly commanding him, right? So he says, for instance, though I am bold enough in Christ to command you to do what is required, yet for love's sake I prefer to appeal to you.
Yeah.
You know, and then he says, I'll repay any loss that Onesimus has caused to you. And then he says, to say nothing of your owing me your own self.
Yeah, I know. I thought
And then
that
he
was really
says,
good.
you know, confident in your obedience, I write to you, knowing you will do even more that I say. This is what this is what kind of clashes with my own personality and my own dispositions, because I
Almost
would
like a
much
mafia boss. Like
well, it's just it sounds passive aggressive. I would much rather someone just use their authority for what they think is best, in just a transparent way,
Yeah, but
rather
we don't
than.
know.
Sorry,
Sorry,
go ahead, Job.
we don't know what the relationship was between Paul and Philemon, right? Because he also makes a joke to him, if I recall correctly, in that letter. He makes kind of a pun on the name of the slave, which I think in Greek means he's
useful.
like useful or something.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
says, "Oh, he has now also become useful to me, like he is
Oh
to
yeah.
you," or something like that.
Oh yeah.
So if you talk to somebody like that and kind of do a pun kind of joke, that suggests a sort of relationship where that can be done. So I don't know. He might be kind of busting Philemon's balls. We don't know.
Yeah.
Could be, yeah. It would be hard to pick that up, too, from our sort of perspective, thousands of years later. Yeah.
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 But I sort of see similar traits in other of his letters, like the sense of, I'm just your servant, or at least your equal, but I'm also like this apostle that has actual authority over you. You know what I
So
mean? And
I
I'd
I
prefer he just inhabits that role.
I
Sorry.
understand and I follow completely, but I'm just now I want to combine it with the Philippians passage we just discussed, which was all about, he has this great authority, Jesus God, but he lowers himself to a slave, etc. And perhaps Paul's not doing that enough. I guess we could criticize him for that. But if he wants to be consistent with that, I don't know, Christology, then he too was like, yeah, I guess I could just demand it of you that you do this, but I'm gonna lower myself and say, like, please, make sure it's indebted to me. But I don't think like Paul is like a perfect human being, so he still, indeed, like I also laughed at some of these sentences, like, yeah, you'll probably do even more, etc. And by the way, you owe your whole existence to me, etc. So he doesn't get out of it, but I think what he wants is consistent with what Jesus represents, if that makes sense.
I agree. I agree. Like that's what he's aiming for, right?
Yeah.
And he's doing it in a human way.
Yeah,
And so
that's for sure.
those different emotions, or those different parts of him, are clashing with each other. I mean, my preference would just be for him to just abandon the attempt to sort of be equal or whatever, and just command. But that's just my disposition, right? Like he can command what is just, what he believes is just, if he believes he has that authority. And Jesus is complicated, because with Jesus, he actually does proclaim his own divinity. He does clearly proclaim his own authority. I mean, okay, so maybe not completely clearly. There's a period during which he conceals it to some extent, but there are many passages where he just announces his authority. And even in the way John tells the washing of the feet, right? He prefaces it by saying, I am your Lord and Master. You call me that, and you're correct. And here I'm going to do this symbolic action for you. And so, does Jesus truly empty himself of his authority as God? Like, no, it seems he actually uses it.
Well,
Not to mention
that's
the
true,
power
but
that he
we're
uses.
we're not at the Gospel of John yet, right? Like, so, like, not
Yeah,
not
yeah,
only
yeah.
in saying like, oh, these are spoilers, don't talk about it yet, but more in the sense like, it's yeah, I just don't feel at the moment. Well, I guess we should stick with Mark for the time being, if that makes sense.
Sure,
Oh, is
sure.
this Bus? Hey,
Why I?
who's there? We don't see you
Uh,
yet. We're
No,
still
no,
halfway
no.
through discussing well, halfway. That's even ambitious, I guess.
Oh, I'll be
But
quiet.
but I guess you're also pretty well prepared for this, are you not? Like, have you done the readings, Bas?
I made you, boy.
Well, I've been working my ass off for you
Okay.
the whole day, and now
Yeah?
my back aches.
Ooh, oh no.
So
Well, I did it on Saturday, and then my butt was aching and my knees. So,
It's
anyways,
going
okay,
into a good
sorry.
direction.
Yeah, this is this is a very different kind of episode. Um, let's focus.
You're getting your house in order.
Yeah, exactly. Let's
Nice.
get our house in order. There's definitely more, I think, that is relevant in these letters. Like, I have more topics that I want to discuss, mostly the angelology, if that's a word.
Maybe we still could. We could kind of continue a little bit,
Yeah.
and then switch over to the reflection.
So, I mean, there's probably more.
I think it
but
merits a little bit more time at least.
yeah,
All the text you read.
yeah, and I think we can also pose some of these questions that we just discussed to Bas. Okay, I want to focus a little bit on First Peter. So I'm gonna go to the first letter of Peter, and which is a letter to sojourners, the diaspora sense, which Paul also seems to be alluding to, right? Like so, that what does it mean that he ascended if he didn't descend first? So there's potentially a link there, but we also find something similar in First Peter, and it's much more pronounced, and it's a little bit reminiscent of Jude, which is Jesus sort of going down to the Spirit. So this is verse 18 in chapter 3, verse 18. I guess I'll also read verse 17 because this is the central. It feels like the central sentence or message of First Peter. It's better to suffer for doing good if God's will so ordains than for doing evil. That really seems like a core message of the letter. Then he says, "For the anointed also suffered once and for all, a just man." I'm reading the David Bentley Hart translation. On behalf of the unjust, so that he might lead you to God, being put to death in flesh, and yet being made alive in spirit, whereby he also journeyed and made a proclamation to the spirit in prison, to those in the past who disobeyed, while God's magnanimity bided its time, in the days of Noah, when the ark was being fashioned, by which a few, that is, 8 souls, were brought safe through the water, which also prefigures the baptism that now saves you, which is not a removal of the filth of flesh, but rather the pledged consent of good conscience to God, through resurrection of Jesus the Anointed, who is at God's right hand, having journeyed into heaven, angels and authorities and powers having been made subordinate to him. So I thought that was a pretty wild like passage to just sort of throw in there. Like, oh, by the way, this is what cosmically sort of took place. And Dave Bentley Hart has like a footnote that is like a couple pages long where he sort of explains the whole, the Nephilim, etc., like everything that took place in the days of Noah and how that's now sort of saved. But I'm curious if any of you finds that sort of interesting or...
That's the least interesting passage I've ever read.
Okay, tell me about it.
No,
Go.
it's amazing. No, I've not. I'm happy to hear you guys' thoughts because I read something like that. I'm just give me all the footnotes because I'm at a loss.
Yeah, there are a bunch of footnotes.
Well, what's this prison?
This prison, Hades? Bas, what do you think?
No, it's not Hades.
Tell us.
It's Tartarus.
That's the same.
Oh, no. Tartarus is a bad place in Hades.
Oh,
Tartarus,
yeah.
I don't know why I
remember
said-
Greek culture, you came before the 3 kings that would weigh your souls. And if you were very nice, you'd go to Elysian Fields. If you were just average, you would go to, say, average Hades. But if you were really bad, you would go to Tartarus.
I don't know.
I don't
why
live in the
spoke.
Netherlands. I live in
regret this.
Leusden.
Can't help it, but it's interesting to see that technical, well, that really Greek mythological language appearing here. But anyway,
Yeah. No. I mean,
I didn't want to comment, but
no,
but
you're perfectly right.
that's
I
fascinating.
asked you, but I'm just kind of. So I was also reminded, like it's near the end of the postscript of David Bentley Hart, where he sort of states something about like obviously we need to keep in mind that yes, this was sort of just the framework of their time, so they use that framework to talk about matters. But he also wants to challenge everyone a little bit by sort of stating like, yeah, but try to see how it could work to us sort of beyond that, because we now really think of sort of that the truth happening in the spirit realm, etc., but not so much on earth. But it's so beautiful how everything is connected here, and how once Christ has sort of received this new form that he's now able to, I don't know, travel in between realms in some ways. And that is also what Paul seems to be demanding of every Christian, from this point onward to be spiritual, like of a spiritual nature. So to also be able to travel between these different realms, or I guess, ontological depths. I don't know how to explain it, basically.
I just want to know, sorry, because I
No, it's
wasn't
fine.
really listening to you too much. Are you in First or Second Peter now?
First Peter. Second Peter is chapter 8. That's
Okay,
next
sorry.
week.
Okay, so, well, in Second Peter is Tartarus. That's the because I heard
Okay.
you talk about the angels.
Yeah.
I heard you talked about the Nephilim and stuff like that. That's in
Well,
Second Peter.
yeah, but also if you go to First Peter chapter 3, what is it, verse 20? To those in the past who disobeyed, so in the past, while God's magnanimity bided its time in the days of Noah. And if you go to Genesis, like in the days of Noah when the ark was being fashioned, then there's reference to the Nephilim. So it doesn't seem to be very strange to be referring to the Nephilim here as well.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think David Bentley Hart, he says like the rebellion of the Satan is a later development. Like you really find that in later letters and also indeed in later gospels, but not so much here yet. So, anyways, but I'm just curious if this is interesting to other people, or if that's like, yeah, what do you do with this? Like it doesn't tell me anything about human psychology, so just brush it aside, or like how do we deal with this as Christians? Because it seems like I don't hear about this in my church, for instance.
Well, repeat to me the exact issue you've got.
Well, specifically, this notion of Jesus after his death journeying down to hell of some sorts, I don't know, to free the spirits who have been, I don't know, kept hostage there or something like that, like since the days of Noah. Like it seems like it has all this significance, like that it ties back to that. Yeah. So, and GP Xavier stating traditionally called the harrowing of hell. And I'm just kind of curious because I noticed that this part of the New Testament is not really mentioned that often, probably because we have a different, framework to look at the cosmos than they did. But still, like I kind of feel that sometimes that is a loss that we don't talk about that because it seems like nonsensical to talk about.
Well, we do have it in the creed.
Yeah.
So it's something that everybody who recites the creed actually assents to. That he went down to the infernos, to the nether parts.
That's true.
And I when I was a kid, I used not to sing that part. So I skipped it because I couldn't make any sense out of it. And later on, I came to understand it in a certain way, and I started to sing it again because we sing the creed in our church.
Yeah. Hopefully your wife's okay, Job.
That's just the usual noise she makes. She's fine.
Okay.
On the website, in the Apostles' Creed, I have a section on that part.
Oh, okay.
That might be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is... Oh, hang on. I'm trying to find it in the Nicene Creed. Yeah, here we go. Let's see. If Socrates is right, then the eternal Son of God in his human death was united to both his soul and his body, even in their separation. As the Eastern Orthodox liturgies put it most eloquently, in his body he has a Sabbath rest after his mighty work on the cross, while in his soul he goes down to the place of the dead, where he alone is, quote, free among the dead. And then there's a footnote. He goes to the realm of the dead as the conqueror of death rather than its victim. For in the work of redemption that the tradition calls the harrowing of hell, he frees all who were in the bosom of Abraham in the underworld awaiting his coming, and opens the kingdom of heaven to all believers. So that's a tradition, but the Nicene Creed doesn't go that far. This says, touches only so briefly on the 3 days when he's a dead man.
So I'm also thinking like, the fact that this was written by, through Silvanus, but by Peter, I mean, I know he's taking a lot from Jude, but nonetheless, uh, he must have had conversations with the risen Jesus. So I'm curious if he got anything like this from firsthand confirmation, or if it's just like this is how they made sense of it. Um, like, did Jesus himself share that this is what he was doing? Like, because they must have asked, like, wait, but what was that like being dead for 3 days? Like, I would want to know, right? If I saw someone again. So, like, all of that seems to be relevant. I have a few more passages by the way.
Maybe I should make one last comment.
Yeah, sure, go ahead. Yeah,
In the also on the website in Yeshu,
yeah,
I actually use this tradition to imagine what could have happened in conjunction with certain near-death experiences. Most of them are quite positive, but some of them are hellish.
yeah,
So I took that as an example to describe what could have happened,
yeah,
what could have been experienced there.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
but that's
exactly.
in Yeshu. So say the reflection is in the Apostles' Creed, but the
Yeah,
actual how could this have happened in the life of Jesus is in Yeshu.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Seems kind of, now I'm really puzzled because usually the people who have positive near-death experience are those who lived a good life and those who really struggle.
Mm.
But I guess he did take upon him the sins of the world, so maybe there is
Yeah.
reason for him to have a hellish experience.
Well, the
But
reason why I put it there because it's in the Creed and it's in First Peter.
yeah, yeah,
But also this is rather fascinating because I imagine Jesus to have spoken to Lazarus after his 3 days
yeah,
in death. And I describe that as a positive near-death experience. But that's my imagination. I don't know whether that happened or not happened, or did not happen.
right.
Yeah,
Um,
I actually did my undergraduate thesis on near-death experiences, and interviewed someone who he's kind of like the foremost researcher alive in the subject. And um, yeah, I mean, lots of people, encounter deceased relatives or, people that have passed on, and a lot of people talk about this like image of, going through a tunnel and seeing this bright light, or, kind of these different images that resemble kind of like crossing over a bridge into, some other dimension. But some people, like, they, by all accounts have lived a good life, but then they have, a lot of people encounter a life review, which is kind of just like kind of usually like a series of pictures of their life. And some people, come out of that experience feeling a lot of remorse or regret of things they've done or things they haven't done. And that, compels them to, kind of universally, the experience of gratitude and appreciation for life is like, kind of on the other side.
mm,
So it's interesting to think of, yeah, Jesus, descending down and encountering the dead. Originally, I had conceptualized that as like people who would have gone to hell, but it sounds like in the absence of a heaven before, he rose, that's just where everyone went. So it's kind of just like everyone, he's encountering everyone and pulling them up to heaven. I don't know if that's the right understanding of it.
I'm
Well,
also
the
curious. Yeah.
the Christus Victor tradition is slightly later, and it's of course one that says he went down to. Oh, it's not slightly later. There are elements in the New Testament already, but the breaking of the gates of death, that's one way of conceptualizing it. The other one is basically imagining Jesus as someone who is dead. And I was thinking, okay, suppose I was in Hades, in this realm that is shady, it's slow, etc. and there is this guy also in Hades saying, "Hey, I'm the savior of the world," and I would say, "But you're dead, just like me." How convincing is that?
Yeah, but
So I was wondering whether the preaching of Jesus
Yes.
was any more convincing if he
Yeah.
was dead.
But
in fact.
you told me this before, but I'm like, we don't know anything. So like, I don't know what.
No.
Maybe,
I'm just imagining the option
I know. But
that
what
he's
if
just
he had
one
like a
of them.
completely, I don't know, luminary like presence there, which was unlike anyone else who entered into Hades. Like, I'm just saying, like, yeah, like
Isn't it
there's so many
fun, Aaron?
possibilities.
Isn't it
But
fun to
There's so
think
many
about?
possibilities, but
yeah,
it pays off to go through the different options and then imagine for yourself whether or not it would be any easier
hmm
for those people who had already died to take and believe his message if we in
yeah,
this world also found it difficult to
yeah,
accept his message,
yeah. That's
even though
the
he did signs and wonders.
we like there's this lecture that I discussed like multiple times with GP. It's by I think Father Stephen de Jong, if I'm not mistaken, who like recounts this Russian folk tale, which probably I think it's like in a Dostoevsky book, where it's about this old sort of vicious lady who never has done anything like good in her life, except for that one time when there was a beggar on the street and she just left the store and she was like, "Well, I'll give him this onion," something like that. That's the only good act she had done in her life, and
What's he gonna do with
what
an onion, though?
yeah, good question. And what happens when she dies? Like that was the one moment, let's say, of fullness, of joy in her life, really, like that sort of the one good moment. And in sort of the grace of heaven, it is sort of presented back to her. So like, basically, there's this, she is down in hell in Hades, and there's this hand with the onion stretching back to her, basically asking her, like, please accept this. And basically, like, I'll bring you back up, let's say. But she, at that point, has grown so, like so bitter that she's like, I don't want that onion. And then she stays there. So, like, that
Yeah.
sort of speaks to what you were talking about, and the difficulty about. Anyways, does anything of this speak to you, GP?
Well, that's a tricky question because I guess I'm not I don't identify as Christian, so I don't sort of
Don't have to. No.
feel like true, but I don't feel like I have to make sense of it or bring it into some more coherent picture or something like that. I'm definitely interested in like what happens after death and like hearing about accounts of near-death experiences and so forth. Um, but I don't know. I mean, I guess I would agree with you, Aaron. Like we just don't know. We just don't know what happened to Jesus after he died. We also don't know that the historical Peter was behind this letter either. So, um, in fact, there's good arguments that maybe he wasn't. So, it may not even have a basis in sort of any account that was given or something like that. It could just be theological logic. It could be, which isn't to
Exactly.
denigrate
Yeah.
it. Like, yeah, it
Yeah.
could be like metaphorically true or resonant in some way, but not based on anything that anyone's been told about the experience of Jesus after death. Um, I mean, if you're a universalist, I think it gives you some hope because
hmm
it implies that Jesus did go down and at least save some people, even after they had died. So, there's that.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think what I'll do, like I want to share my screen again, and then I have a few passages which I'll just read out, and then I want to hear whoever wants to talk about them. Is that okay, Lucas? And then we can see.
You're
Yeah.
allowed. Yeah.
Okay. It's your show. Um, okay. So this is the one we already read at the start, Philippians 2. This is a very famous one in Colossians 1. So I'll read it. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. This is the NAV. For in him all things were created. So in the Son, I guess, or the invisible God. Things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood, shed on the cross. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your mind because of your evil behavior. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death, to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. If you continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope held out in the gospel. This is the gospel that you heard and that has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, and of which I, Paul, have become a servant. That's the first one. Feel free to speak, but otherwise I'm going to go on to Ephesus. We discussed Philemon, which, by the way, like the one line that we hadn't discussed, which, well, or at least that I think just deserves more attention, is to not take him back as a slave, but as a brother. Like, just I think that's very radical. Something we can discuss maybe a little bit later. And there's these two passages from Ephesians that I would like to focus on. So they're brief. Praise be to God, to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us in the heavenly realms with every spiritual blessing in Christ. For he chose us in him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight. In love, he predestined us for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ in accordance with his pleasure and will, to the praise of his glorious grace, which he has freely given us in the one he loves. In him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins, in accordance with the riches of God's grace that he lavished on us. With all wisdom and understanding, he made known to us the mystery of his will, according to good pleasure, which he purposed in Christ, to be put into effect when the times reach their fulfillment, to bring unity to all things in heaven and on earth under Christ. And then this is like a prayer, I think, from Paul for the communities. For this reason I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all God's people, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. Okay, so those I felt were quite weighty and important passages that we haven't discussed yet. And I'm curious if anything stood out to any of you that you were like, yeah, I want to discuss something there.
Ephesians 1 is a Calvinist favorite.
Is it because of what? What's the link to Calvinism?
If I remember what you just read.
Predestination.
Yeah, and the being chosen from the beginning of the world by his glory and this and that. It's kind of, there's these key passages of Romans 9.
That's why it's so funny to read the Dave Bentley Hart translation, because in each footnote he's like, this is not about predestination. This is not the Calvinist.
He would say that. He would say that. He would be predestined to say that.
Yeah.
I am wrestling a lot with Calvinism, so this is all top of mind right now.
Okay, okay. I imagine. Yeah. Did you receive a response from your pastor already?
Not yet. I think I scared him.
Oh no. Okay.
That's fine.
Anyways. Obviously, what we could also do if there are no responses, then we can move on to the next part, which is a reflection on the whole.
Well, Aaron, did you want to say anything about these passages yourself, because you brought them up? Anything stood out to you? Or did it raise anything inside of yourself?
Certainly.
Go ahead.
So first of all, this seems to be even more like we were having discussions about what is exactly meant in terms of the divine nature of Jesus that is being proclaimed in Philippians, but in Colossians it's like, in him, in the Son, all things were created, things in heaven and on earth. It's really, like, as I said before, this new Genesis, which is just so radical, it seems. It's just completely, it's almost like it took off like this chapter, that all of a sudden like a new layer is added in terms of like the understanding of Jesus within those communities. And then again, it's mentioned that he is, over all the thrones, powers, rulers, authority. So again, that sort of cosmic, like over principalities, etc., which seems to be relevant too. Um, and then in terms of the Ephesians, what I thought was interesting also that it has this sense, and I know this is difficult to translate, but that he did it to be put into effect when the times reach their fulfillment. I think Dave Bentley Hart translates as when the seasons are fulfilled. But like, I'm just again still in awe by how much of a cosmic event this was for people, and increasingly so, like far more I feel like in this chapter than before. Though obviously I think in 1 Corinthians 15 there's also a sense. But it seems like it's emphasized in multiple letters now here, or maybe I'm just noticing it more. That's also very possible.
No. You're absolutely right. I mean, this is the traditional thing about the authorship question also.
Yeah.
There's so much development going on.
Yeah.
Can that still have happened in the days of the historical Peter and Paul, or did it happen later? And therefore, is this therefore a argument for a later pseudepigraphical letter? But if you would read it, and I encourage you to read it in this phase, then the implication, and I'm talking now in a novelistic sense, then the implication in the story is that the resurrection was a driving the Christology. So the Christology was going on, and we see a development in those letters that is really fascinating. I mean, the bits and pieces are there earlier, but you can definitely see it become more majestic and more cosmological here.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like I know that I already read a little bit ahead for the next chapter that Paul then starts talking about having disagreement with other people about the meaning of the resurrection, etc. So it does seem like this was not just like this minor event they didn't really talk about.
No. This whenever this letter was written, at the time that it was written, it was huge.
Yeah. So I was just like, I just thought all of this was so beautiful. So perhaps there is little to discuss. And perhaps that's why GP is more silent than usual. I'm a little bit suspicious.
I was just going to ask Aaron before we move on to the sort of broader reflection on where we're at,
Yes.
like in the course. If maybe we could each sort of finish off this section by reflecting on some things in general that we noticed from this chapter, or maybe bring up some
Please.
topics that we
Yeah.
haven't.
No,
Yeah?
go ahead,
Okay.
please. It's like I was gonna ask that sort of anyways because I've kind of been feeling like I've been talking too long.
Would
Do
you like
you
to
want to
start?
start us off?
Yeah, perfect.
Sure. So, I mean, one thing, sort of like just a minor thing, and then maybe a bit more of a major topic, but the minor thing that I noticed when I was reading through Philippians, so I was reading the following passage. This is from 3, verses 8 to 11. In order that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which comes through faith in Christ, the righteousness of God that depends on faith, etc. As I was reading that whole passage, and I think reading it in the context of the surrounding passages made it more clear to me, I got the sense that Paul wants not to have any righteousness of his own simply out of love of Jesus. Like he wants all his righteousness to be from Jesus because this is who he loves, like above everything, and thinks has absolute value. And because for me, part of what I'm trying to do is sort of understand where Paul's coming from this, because you can sort of look at it in a more detached way, and you can say, well, people do have righteousness of their own. Like you can look around and see other people being less righteous, more righteous. It's meaningful to have that discussion about what is more just or less just, and what people's behavior is better or worse. But then Paul sort of just says, like, nothing is worthwhile except Jesus. And I think I can understand that psychologically by someone who's so in love with someone or loves someone so much that they really just want to kind of have everything that's of worth in them be from them. And so that was sort of illuminating for me reading through that passage.
By the way,
more
like just a question about that. Like, can you
sure.
also imagine it loving someone so much who you've never met in the flesh, who you've only
Yes.
had this mystic? Okay, yeah, cool.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. I think that the mystical experience is key, right? I think that informs it. The mystical encounter with Christ um, informs this love. Having said that, saints throughout history have had a similar kind of love, and they've not always had a mystical personal encounter with Christ. So yeah, I can. On a personal level, no, obviously it's harder to relate to, not having had anywhere near that experience. But the other main thing I wanted to just discuss, which is more a reflection on the chapter as a whole, because the chapter was called Getting Our House in Order or something like that. So yeah, Getting Our House in Order. And so it seemed like a major sort of thesis of that is that we have all these, I think we have Peter, we have Colossians, and we have Ephesians. I think those are the three where you have these house rules. You have these rules for how slaves and masters should relate, wives and husbands should relate, and children and parents should relate. And then you also have a couple of verses about how sort of citizens should relate to the emperor as well. And so it seemed like the sort of thesis of that chapter was that these rules are, let's say, a kind of an adaptation to society at the time, because otherwise the movement would be too radical that it would undermine itself effectively. It would alienate itself from wider society, and the kind of what would you say, the slanders that people were spreading about it would be even more damaging, let's say. But really, the sense was that Jesus' message was radically egalitarian, even in a social way, and that maybe it's just taken time for that to come to fruit. I want to push back against that. I think that there's something to be said for this vision that's laid out in these letters as something that is positive and that is actually what's aimed for, and that's not simply an adjustment or sort of something that is necessary to go through along the way to a greater goal. So, for instance, it's hard to take hierarchy out of the Bible. It's hard to take hierarchy even out of the story of Christ. The whole story depends on hierarchy, and so we saw that with with the verses from Philippians that we opened the talk with about God. The absolute highest God descending as Jesus to the lowest state. That whole movement depends on hierarchy. It presupposes that God is supreme and that he is due all honor and et cetera, et cetera. So it presupposes hierarchy. What the and Jesus himself claims authority. So he claims that authority to some extent, even though he enacts it in this different way, or this radical way. So the letters to me seem to be saying, they don't seem to be questioning hierarchy itself, but they seem to be saying that this is what hierarchy is for, or this is what hierarchy, when it's used for the purpose that it was created for, is most fruitful and is most true to its nature, and so on and so forth. So, for instance, the higher authority always sort of flows out and serves in a certain sense that which it has authority over. That's the basic pattern, right? And then, of course, that which it has authority over must be obeyed by that which it does have authority over. The children must obey the parents, the wife must obey the husband, the slave must obey the master, everyone must obey the emperor. And so that seems to me to be more the positive vision. And so the question is that just one stage on the way to real equality, where everyone is actually considered equal in society? And is that the better outcome? Or is actually the hierarchy that's permeated by love, is that the better outcome? So I would lean more towards the idea of the hierarchy permeated by love as being the actual better outcome than just the pure equality, even if that pure equality were attainable, which of course it's not. But even if that were attainable, I wouldn't say that was a kind of a goal. And so, like, to zoom in for a second,
And sorry, this is taking a while to develop, but hopefully I can bring it to a close in just a second.
I've been waiting for this whole evening, so go ahead.
So, obviously, everything we talk about in this space is going to be controversial. So, so it's unavoidable. But be that as it may, thinking about the way it describes marriage, right? So that doesn't gel with a lot of people living in the modern West today. That seems something that's actually bad, positively bad. The idea that you would have a husband that has a superior kind of authority to the wife, as opposed to just being partners and being completely equal and being completely on the same level. But then I don't know. I think that you could think about it more deeply, and you could consider like, is that such a bad thing after all? If it's actually done in the way that Paul describes it, right? Because then what's happening? Like, like the husband does have authority, but he uses that authority for the benefit of his wife, just as he would, treat his own body, right? Like if anything, it's that there's a strong implication that he does more for his wife than he would do for himself, that he does more for the family unit than he would do for him personally. And that's that idea that authority is something that overflows itself. It's not something that one stores up and keeps for oneself. And so what are the benefits of having one partner that actually isn't just on the equal level, but is, the head, so to speak? Also, speaking of head, right, I think it's First Corinthians maybe, but there's that passage about the husband is the head of the wife, Christ is the head of the husband, God is the head of Christ. So that's another argument, I would say, that hierarchy is built into Paul's conception of society. It's not just something that he has to adjust to or makes a concession for. So what is the benefit of having sort of a head to a marriage or a head to a family? I mean, for one, like you don't have two people constantly contending with each other for power. And it's just natural to do that. Like that's not a bad thing, but it's just natural to sort of want to be secure, to want to know where you stand, and to sort of be a little bit weary and a little bit defensive if you think that power or authority is being taken away from you. And so having one person have that head role that nevertheless serves the family, serves the relationships, serves the marriage, obviates that whole anxiety and that whole need. There's symbolic unity. Like that's why countries have presidents. That's why countries have kings, right? Even though the kings have no actual power nowadays in many places. One person can just devote themselves to leading and therefore leading well. There's no constant sort of bickering. It can just sort of flow like that. And then, the other thing is that it doesn't even necessarily need to look too different from a regular marriage, except perhaps being smoother, in the sense that it doesn't mean that the husband sort of just takes unilateral decisions all the time. It could be that the husband continually consults with the wife and asks her opinion and so on and so forth. And so it may look not too different from a regular marriage. And you could also say, and again, this is going to be controversial, but you could say it aligns with the natural dispositions of men and women, right? The man having much more of a drive to lead or to rule, to put it more provocatively, and the woman having much more of a drive to nurture and care, and so, falling into that role. So anyway, that's my defense of that kind of arrangement, if it's taken in Paul's sense, which is permeated by love, not in the domineering sense, not in this kind of sense of violence or anything like that, but still preserving hierarchy. So I just put that out there. That's my defense of the idea that this is a positive vision in its own right.
Andrew Tate has entered the chat. No, just kidding. Thank you so much. Michael, you want to respond?
I agree with, I guess I agree with that like completely. And I would want to offer maybe, because this is something that I was thinking a lot about too. Like, we were talking about earlier with Jesus emptying himself, becoming a slave. And then we were even talking in previous weeks about, kind of the transcendence, the transcendent symbol of Jesus, as kind of a way of transcending, the moral law of the Jewish people at that time. and then how that squares with, what Paul was talking about in a lot of his letters of, wives obeying husbands, children obeying parents, slaves obeying masters. And what I was thinking of, you know, reading that is the well, I guess relatively modern invention in democratic societies of checks and balances, and how hierarchies need checks and balances, or else they become totalitarian, because our sinful nature is kind of disproportionately attracted towards power and like outsized forms of that. And like in theory, a marriage where there's a clear kind of hierarchy of not hierarchy as control, but hierarchy as I suppose authority, and a certain level of kind of I guess kind of bifurcated roles, like the man kind of more towards masculine leadership, making decisions that move the partnership forward, the wife in kind of a caretaking, nurturing role. In theory, that makes things a lot more clearly delineated. But what I don't know what happens when that becomes too rigid, or becomes too dogmatic or something. And so it seems like there needs to continuously be a kind of dying to self, and connection with like the true authority that structures the marriage, which is God, which it's like I kind of struggle, not struggle in the sense that I disagree, but it's just like a kind of a tension point between like how to, because I do think hierarchies like need to be there, and sorry, postmoderns, but like I do think they're necessary, but it seems like they're always subject to change. The ones that are socially constructed by sinful humans, and so I think like an openness, a humility, a like a flexibility within one's role, whatever it is, children, parent, husband, wife, employee, employer, because kind of like what happens if a slave is trying to obediently follow their master, but their master is whipping them for things that they didn't do, or constantly undermining their work. Like we wouldn't say that master is following Jesus and is overflowing with the spirit. And so does that slave still have a duty to follow that master, or that wife to follow that husband, if the covenant, so to speak, has been broken? I think that's I think that's a relatively modern thought to even entertain that, because 2,000 years ago divorce was like was completely off the table. So yeah, I just a lot more questions than answers, but I think it's a really fascinating thing to consider.
Servants, be submissive to your masters with all respect, not only to those who are good and gentle, but also to those who are unreasonable. For this finds favor, if for the sake of conscience toward God a person bears up under sorrows when suffering unjustly. For what credit is there if when you sin and are harshly treated, you endure it with patience. But if when you do what is right and suffer for it, you patiently endure it, this finds favor with God.
Yeah, so I do struggle with those verses, but um, and I would say like, so I don't in principle, let's say, disagree with what's been said, even though I find it yeah, intuitively difficult because of our time, I suppose, and what I'm used to, and the equality that I try to foster in my own marriage. Um, Having said that, like just a few textual things, which like Bas will know way more about, but obviously like it is a completely different world. So which is not to say like, oh, it had to work through this because this is a necessary evil. It's like, no, it was the best thing for that time. But I'm not convinced that it's the best thing for our time, precisely because the institution of marriage was completely different, right? It was a very, very like it was like a teenager, like woman or girl was being married off to an adult man. So I think that's just very different from what we think about when we're talking about marriage. And then obviously the other aspect is that um, the vast majority of labor was being done by men. Um, and I'm just like, I just, what? I was talking
Vast
about,
majority of labor was being done by men?
yeah, not? Is that
No,
not the
no, no,
case?
no. There was no
The
way of escaping labor for 90% of the
No, okay.
population.
I mean like the labor market. That's at least what I
Like paid
yeah,
work.
yeah. Male labor was the foundation of most of the economy. That's sort of what David Bentley Hart makes of it. Um,
Of course, the women were all working in various ways, at least at home, if not outside of home. So I think that would be the counterpoint to that, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
fair enough.
I
Um,
doubt that's what you're saying though, Aaron. Like
no,
I
no,
don't think you're saying labor in general.
yeah. Obviously, like I don't mean that women were sitting, let's say, on the couch waiting or
Yeah.
just taking. But anyways, um, I guess one other thing is the difference of the word that is being used. So I think I'm now in, I think I'm still in Colossians chapter 3. Sorry, it's difficult to see where I'm at. I'm in Colossians, yes, chapter 3. And for instance, over there, it might be different in the other letters, but they actually use a different word for children, obey your parents, or slaves, obey your lords. Yes. But then with wives, it's not obey your husband. It's something that Dave Bentley Hart translated as station yourself under your husbands, because you have the Greek word hypotasso, which means literally something like subordinate, but it's a different word than you have in terms of the slavery and the children, because it can also mean something like stationed under the shelter of someone. And I like his rhetoric here. He says, in the case of wives and husbands, the issue here does not seem to be merely one of domestic authority, which in the first century would have been a matter of positively banal obviousness, but also one of reciprocal service and protection. And that's getting to your point, GP, I think. It's like what this ideal hierarchy looks like. I'm just trying to say that I'm not convinced that what is being said here is the best for our time, not because of your first assertion, which is like, oh, it's necessary evil. It's like, no, I totally agree. Like it is a positive vision that's being said, but it is a positive vision, in my view, for the first century, and not a positive vision necessarily for the 21st century. Which is not to say that it's a necessary evil to get through, but yeah,
May I give a few reflections here?
sure, yeah,
Because GP, you're absolutely right, of course. There is a very positive way of talking about this. When you get to 1 Timothy, you will see that there are a number of problems arising. 1 Timothy, for instance, has that you have to have this submission in order that the gospel will not be blasphemed. That's an interesting one. Why would the gospel be blasphemed? Okay, so there's something in the gospel that would be blasphemed if there would be uprising, rioting, or in the household. So, okay, good. Then the other one in 1 Timothy is that believing masters that slaves should not be looking down on believing masters because they're simply brothers. Oh, that's interesting. So there are a number of moments where you see that that there can be a tension between the egalitarian tendency in the gospel and in the letters of Paul, that men and women are equal in Christ, that slaves and masters are equal in Christ. That is actually that is in the New Testament. We find it in the New Testament, and at the same time that Paul is singing praises of a truly Christian relationship between the two, because that will be like simultaneously serving one another, each from their position. And that is your positive view that you saw. But the text that Lucas was quoting about even the harsher master should be obeyed shows you that it's not always that ideal. So there's a number of things going on at the same time. So one part is there's this egalitarian tendency, and some people could say, well, you're my brother, why should I serve you? Why should I obey you? Either a wife to a husband or a slave to a master. We see that in 1 Timothy 6. Or you could have the situation that you would no longer want to obey your master because the gospel has set you free. Then in that case, the gospel will be blasphemed by the outsiders, something you also see in 1 Peter. Or, and that's the most beautiful thing, you actually go into this reciprocal relationship. And when my wife and I, when we married, we went to this pastor, and he was really coming from the old way of saying, okay, this is the formula that we have. Wives should submit to their husbands, and my wife is not very submissive. So how do we deal with that? And then we said, yeah, but read what it says, so that it points to Jesus, who gave himself for others. So that means that we both have a responsibility, even if I am somewhat to lead, I have to lead as a servant. And even if the other one has to somewhat obey, the obeying must be done as Jesus would obey in order to lead the other one to a better place. So there's this really reciprocal relationship that exists in this beautiful vision of Paul. Just a few reflections so that we can see that all these things are happening at the same time. So you're absolutely right, GP, of what you're seeing there. But the other stuff that I write about is also happening, and quite notably so.
I think we also value power a lot more than we should. And leading is not necessarily meaning that you're more valuable as a person, that you're leading. Authority is not necessarily desired. I'm often reminded of, leaders in a leader in a sports team. For my reference, it's not like the leader is always the best player or something like that. You're the leader because you possess certain qualities, and that's just the way it is. And hierarchy is undeniable and inevitable in many ways. But I think one of the biggest modern mistakes is taking leadership and taking authority as putting above, just because the man is the head of the household, or has been in many traditional instances, doesn't mean the man is more valuable than the woman, or even more powerful if you understand power properly. Yeah. Maybe just for sake of time, we should wrap up our reflections on the text, so that we have a little bit left for our separate session, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good thing that Bas is already here, that we don't have to invite
makes
him
it
now.
easier, for sure.
Yeah. And we had the unsurprising the surprising attendance of Job. So, yeah. You want to start, Lucas, because I think you need to, I think all of us probably need to leave around 10, but you need to leave first. So I think the general question that we wanted to talk about is, what has this way of reading the New Testament brought you?
Yeah. All right. I can start. It has brought me for sure a much deeper sense of, what's this word I'm looking for? It's not brotherhood, it's
fellowship.
Fellowship. Thank you.
There, yeah.
Thank you, guys. A sense of fellowship with the early followers of Jesus, a sense of, okay, I'm not actually that far off from the path. I always felt that to I would always be impeded to be a true follower of Jesus because of time, because of circumstance, because the modern world is so unnatural in many ways. I always felt so far from it. And I think reading it in this way, creating a fellowship and a deeper sense of connection with those people, and with Jesus himself in many ways, even though he's not present in a lot of these letters, he is very present. And I guess you're reminded more of the power of his non-physical presence through these people as they're so influenced by him. So that's I think the main thing that it's brought me thus far. If more comes to mind, I will share.
Lucas, I often talk about the impact of Jesus. What kind of impact do you see on these people?
Well, it's a radical opening. It's it's basically a massive dose of psilocybin on the whole society. If people just questioning everything, it's complete aporia in many ways, and that's why I find it so fascinating to study as a piece of history as well. It's because everyone deals with that differently. Some people say, okay, my whole life needs to be different. Other people will see all the good things that were already there, and that they have to figure it all out together. But that something big happened is so undeniable. Find that absolutely fascinating, and I go through that every day still when I contemplate the reality or the potential reality of Jesus as Christ or God.
Yeah, one of the way that we do theology and critical scholarship is often what can we know for certain about Jesus, which is awfully little. What can we know for certain about Peter or the author of First Peter or what have you, which is awfully little. But if you turn it around and you can say, well, if I see this impact, what kind of Jesus could explain this kind of impact? Then you need to come up with a pretty strong theory, because a peasant who happened to sort of step on the toes of a few Roman rulers and got ditched, that really doesn't explain what you see happening here, does it?
Yeah, absolutely. Who wants to continue?
I was also thinking, like, GP wasn't allowed to respond to all the responses to him.
No,
So
no,
maybe
that's totally
Okay.
I
Okay.
yeah. I don't want to prolong that discussion anymore, but I just appreciate all your responses, so thank you for that.
But go ahead if you want to say what has this brought you, this way
Okay.
of approaching the New Testament?
So what has it brought me? I think what you said, Bas, about the impact of Jesus is really important, because we're seeing sort of the reverberations of Jesus, and especially in Paul. I mean, we've only read one gospel so far, so we've sort of been more focused on Paul. But obviously, Paul was completely focused on Jesus, so we're sort of getting a glimpse of Jesus through Paul. And I think for me, what's sort of come through this is sort of how experientially based Paul's writing, theology, worldview is. Obviously based on his vision of Jesus, his encounter with Jesus, maybe even his conversations with the risen Jesus.
However short.
However short, yeah. I mean, who knows exactly what he experienced, but that he experienced something, I think, is indisputable, and something very powerful. And also just the role that the power of the Spirit plays in the early community. Paul's always referencing it, and often referencing it as sort of like, this is your guarantee that your faith is not in vain, that this is for real, which makes me think that he's not just making some abstract theological formulation there. He's talking about actual events, actual experiences, actual amazing things that have happened through the Spirit of God, or at least what was widely perceived to be the Spirit of God in those communities. And so So yeah, I think that's really important. I think also I've just been sort of trying to grasp his psychology, and obviously, as I referred to, like had some things I like about him, some things that I don't, some things that
Yeah, I
clash with
heard
me.
you in earlier editions,
Yeah.
and I really love that, by the way, that you're doing that. But because this is precisely what makes him human,
Hmm.
and sort of gets us out of this holy scripture stuff, and really to some experiential stuff, and see how that relates to us, etc. So yeah,
As a human, I can love him more. Like I've referred to in a previous episode, that I've sort of got more of a sense of love for Paul. It's as a
mm,
human being, though. It's not as an infallible author of doctrine or
no,
something like that. Yeah, but
no.
definitely as a human being, I can feel that love for him. Um, and yeah, I think those are the main things. I think it's a great way to do it in sort of chronological order like this. So I'm really enjoying this way of approaching it.
Wow. And I also think what you're saying about the spirit is absolutely true. He saw, or he uses it as an argument why
Hmm.
something is happening, something that is tangible. And it's almost like the spread of the Pentecostal movement, where people started to speak in tongues and have visions, etc., etc. That something like that seems to be happening.
Hmm. Hmm.
Lucas, to me, like you're always just pointing to the side, like you're in
I
a
never,
different square.
although I feel like if he's pointing to the right, he's pointing to me. Because,
Okay,
but
then go ahead.
to me, Lucas is on the far right, so to me, he's pointing out of the
Lucas is
screen.
unfortunately on the far right. That's correct. That's
Oh gosh.
Oh yeah, but Michael for me is
Very clear.
there.
yeah. Michael's
This
made the middle
Zoom is
side.
terrible, but everyone on the live stream
Unfortunately,
will see
Lucas,
it.
not everyone has the same perspective as
Okay,
you.
I'm sorry,
On the
guys.
far right.
I'm sorry, guys.
He's learning. He's learning. He's still. But...
um, yeah. How has this been for me? Oh, there's so much to say. I feel like the the biggest way this is distinct from like a Bible study, say, because I'm in one right now, so I can, kind of compare and contrast. Um, is the rich context of both the rich context of what was going on when these letters were written, and what was going on societally and also personally for the writers, and for it to really be grounded in that perspectival understanding, as opposed to trying to mine the Bible for pearls of wisdom, or for understanding its coherence, or its even its like divine beauty. Like, um approaching it in this way feels, um especially in the context of like the kind of narrative arc, the hero's journey. I know you mentioned that, boss, like the hero's journey of the Bible, and also like the individual writers of it. um it just feels really accessible and personal, and like GP was saying, even though there are lots of challenging parts of Paul, and things that I struggle with, like, he, I haven't read the whole Bible yet, but I feel like bar none, he takes the take your cross and walk with me like more seriously than just about anybody. And that is, I think that's where my love for him comes from, is just like that like admiration for like truly believing in the crucifixion and the resurrection, and trying to have society, kind of uh be made in that image. And that's, yeah, like, to try and imagine that at that time where Christians were getting persecuted and, people were getting martyred and Jews were, uh, full of debauchery, to have that conviction and that faith, and also try and approach it from like a Christly love and unconditional positive regard. Um, just like holding all of that complexity and holding all of that paradox. I don't think I would have got that appreciation had I not read it in this way and dialogued with all of you who are noticing all of those things and connecting it to your own lives and your own ways of having to wrestle with those paradoxes. So yeah, we talked a little bit about time earlier, and I think that has also been like really present and alive, both the like hyper specificity of the time of when this was written and how that influences and informs the what was most salient, what was most important, but also the timelessness of these messages and how they can be applied to today. Yeah, there's probably a lot more that I could say, but yeah, it's been a sweet ride.
Wow, wow. And what I also think is nice about you comparing it to an ordinary, it's not never ordinary, but to a Bible study group, which is really trying to get some divine truths out of it, and perhaps you can also comment on this, GP, is that in principle this format allows you to do this also with Jews or Muslims or non-believers whatsoever, because it is really an interest in the people and you can see what's happening to them. At least that's what I hope.
Yeah, I'd really agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it didn't work this way, but yeah, that actually worked what Michael did. Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, like I've also had many conversations off the record with Bas about this, so I think he got a pretty good sense of what it has brought me. I've like the boring answer is that I found it exciting to really get a good glimpse into a new scholarly discipline that I was unfamiliar with. A glimpse, it's just like the sense. That was the boring part of the answer because it says nothing about sort of the experience of these people. But honestly, like I just thought it was exciting to sort of get to know how you form an argument and how you sort of like what kind of evidence you use, etc. Like all of that was just kind of relatively unfamiliar for me. So I gained an appreciation for that, and therefore also for your life work. So that was exciting for me. So that I can attach that to a personal aspect because it makes me understand you.
Thank you.
Far better. Yeah. And then specifically, obviously, like the story itself, I was scared. I was unsure whether at the start, we were gonna do the modern thing, the modern, all too modern thing of privileging Chronos over Kairos, let's say, in terms of time, and that has not come true. Like that, like unfortunately, like that fear has not materialized, because I actually felt that the way in which it was presented and in which you sort of felt the movement growing, etc. And to me, it feels like I now have a better grasp of just the fact that we still haven't read any other gospel beside the Gospel of Mark, which, by the way, has a time span of, at least in your chronology, of 40s to 60s. So it's possible that, for instance, was a little bit later than some of the letters.
Maybe it's just written now as you read in this.
Exactly.
It could have been, yeah.
Exactly.
But the stories were around. I mean, that's the basic
Of
message
course,
of putting it in the
because
40s.
they're talking about Mark, who was there, and Peter, etc. So obviously, but it's still, to me as a reader, like for them this is like decades, And for me, this is like months, and I've already read them, and still I'm like, when are we getting to the Gospels? Not because the letters are not interesting, like they're fascinating. I love reading them, but I mean this more in the positive sense, like in the humbling sense. There's like, wow, this was really like we might sometimes be doing it the wrong way around of privileging the Gospels in terms of the order in which you're supposed to be learning about the stories, because there is definitely something extremely exciting and fascinating, exactly what you said, that this was not a minor historical figure who could have been anybody, and who the Richard Dawkinses of this world ask if he really existed, etc. Like, um, this was something major,
Yeah,
like an earthquake.
yeah,
And at the same time, it's frustrating that we get so little of something that we can say are his words, if that makes sense, and get to know
yeah.
him better. Um, so I'm kind of torn in that front. And I guess maybe like not so much a critical note on the work, but what I did notice is that perhaps that's because we're doing it more free form, so without you, for instance, to guide us. Um, and perhaps because we're not exactly the target audience, I'm not sure. But I have
I
noticed that
don't know
we,
what the target audience
yeah,
is, Aaron, to be
I just
honest.
want to say, like, I have noticed that we haven't focused as much on the discussion questions. Even though I read them every time and I thought they were interesting every time, and yet I find that they haven't, yeah, been central in our discussion, which is also fine because maybe they are there as,
They're just for those who want to use
exactly,
them, they can use them.
yeah,
And
exactly,
if you get something out of it, something else out of it, then that's
yeah,
informative to me as well. So I'm
yeah.
very happy not to be there
No, 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 no,
and
exactly,
just see what you guys are doing with it.
yeah, and no, so I thought that was fascinating, and I think I also got a good sense of the value of reading different translations a little bit, even though you try to discourage me to get an idea of the bigger picture first before I start to do that. But nonetheless,
Well,
yeah,
not to get bogged down in the
yeah, yeah,
detail before you get the overall story,
yeah.
but after that, you should get
Maybe
bogged
don't
down in the
start off with
detail.
reading David Bentley Hart footnotes. Yeah,
Well, the footnotes are important, but
yeah, 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 yeah.
I did make the recommendation to use, say, the audios first,
Yeah. Which,
just
by the
to
way,
avoid you.
I made the audios every time, just so I know.
No, I mean
So
the
so I'm
Bible
obligated.
audios, the
Yeah, yeah,
Bible audios. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. But I
Yeah,
incorporated them in the
yeah.
thing, like with the NIV. Um. So yeah, I find it fascinating. I also really got an appreciation for Paul, even though indeed I also find him a little bit difficult. But yeah, I just gotta like I got to know him. I don't think I knew him before, so it's kind of like I now find it really interesting that I had a text by Paul, which makes sense. Like he wrote so much of the New Testament, but for my own wedding ceremony, which I
Hmm.
still agree with. So I love that text. It's also the one we did with Lectio Divina, but that I had little understanding of who wrote it, if that makes sense. And I still find those words beautiful, and I also don't find them diminished by knowing the specific context for which it was written. But nonetheless, I just feel like tremendously enriched by getting to know these people, and sometimes also a little bit frustrated by having this privileged understanding of Paul over other people in the time, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
would kind of
Yeah.
like I really struggled the first few chapters with all these other names that are just mentioned, but you don't read any of their words, and slowly then they return, and then you get the sense, these are Priscilla and Aquila, for instance. This is Tychicus, um, and you kind of make sense of it. But
You build a world as you go, and
yeah,
then you go again.
exactly,
You have to
definitely,
go again, and
yeah,
you will see different things every time that you go again. That's the weird part of it. What I would hope is that this gives you a framework to make it real people.
yeah, and and obviously like just the radical idea of like also like this was the last sentence of your summary for this chapter was he dwells as much in heaven as in our hearts, which is like just strange. Like just the utter mystery and strangeness of it that I find so fascinating to learn. But it's also beautiful, and it's also something that we're taught, but to get this really intimate sense and this task and this demand, and am I living up to what it means for instance to be a Christian? And so yeah, it's been fascinating, and I'm very much looking forward to continue.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
uh, cool.
Wonderful. I just want to say thank you all because this is so important for me to see how people are interacting and what it does or does not do. I mean, I'm open to learn and to see what kind of audiences there could be and what kind of adaptations would be needed to make it more suitable for those audiences. I mean, perhaps I don't have to do it. Perhaps you guys are just inspiring someone to pick up that pen and to make it something of their own. That would be lovely. I think the big revolution is to start taking the authors or the implied authors. In literary terms, we rather speak about the implied author because otherwise you get all these discussions about authorship. So we rather talk about the implied author, and at least that you can make those implied authors real human beings with some flesh and bones to them, because the authorship question just tells you, well, I cannot be certain of anything, therefore I cannot know anything about the author. And in the end, you're left with nothing. And if you at least take the implied author as your starting point, then someone of flesh and blood emerges. And I think that's at least that for me, that was a way of becoming part of that story world.
Yeah, and I was also reminded of how much of the Old Testament I have yet to fully familiarize myself with, because it's drenched in references to it, right? Like constantly. That sometimes I'm like, I know that one, like, or I know that one, I know that one, etc. But so often it's just like this Psalm, or it's Isaiah, or it's Jeremiah. And so it's also, you're getting to know this world, but then you're also like, it's not just this world. And then like because I already read ahead, like then, there's obviously First Clement, and now I'm looking forward to to read that after this, like so. Yeah, it expands.
I discussed some of the early patristic literature in the epilogue.
Cool. Okay.
So you may because that informs us actually how these collections were formed. But what you're now doing is treat them as individual letters, and later on you have to deal with it that they are also collections.
Yeah. Right. No, I see. Yeah, like I just find that really, really fascinating to get this sort of like this second hand of generation who sort of, some of them knew not Jesus, but they knew people who knew Jesus. So it's like, I don't know, like all of that is just how it then starts growing. Yeah. Great.
Can I wrap up this burrito?
Yeah. So I have about I think 20 more discussion theses we could discuss.
I mean, I always feel a sense at the end of these discussions that there's too much to do still, but
there's so many notes.
The inexhaustibleness of these texts, they give me hope that I'll have a lifetime of joy and depth out of them, as I see in my own flesh and blood below me. I don't know where he is for you guys, but he's below me as well in hierarchy. Just kidding. Guys, next week we're already doing the next episode. That's exciting. Death to Christians.
A shorter version, and it will again be without Buzz. I mean, you're welcome to join, but
no. You just carry on like you're doing. I mean, that's I still believe that's the best way of doing it, and perhaps I may return somewhere towards the end of the series.
It's probably what Jesus said. Maybe I'll return somewhere before the end of the series. Maybe we'll see how I feel.
Yeah. I'm also like just realized that, like, honestly, I felt a little bit sad when I was reading like the next chapter already and reading about the deaths of Peter and Paul, and then realizing that that's like next week, if that letter is at all indirectly from Paul. I think it's Second Timothy, right? That is the relevant one. That's the last one that we have by Paul, which is just like, say goodbye to this person you've been intimately getting to know maybe these last few months.
I can make you a little bit more happy about that, because you still have the Gospel of Luke and the Book of Acts to go.
That's
and
true.
then there's a second life.
I know, but it's not his words, right? Like it's like
no, but it's someone who loves him.
Yeah. I still love the like, I will speak to you of that unknown God, like that, just like Paul being the greatest salesman in Athens or in Greece. Yeah.
But
So
guys, I
anyways,
really have to go.
yeah.
Do you want to? Are you also done? Do you want to continue? I can also keep it on for a little bit longer, but I have to.
I can't see a facial structure of GP Xavier, so I don't know, but I'm okay going to bed.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
guys.
I'm good with wrapping it up. I mean, we could talk about it forever, so we might as well stop now.
Exactly. Thanks, GP. Thank you for your time, for waking up early.
That's
Thanks, Michael, for waking up regular.
Yeah,
Thanks, Bas, for carving out time in your busy schedule. And thank you, Aaron, for doing so much for this series. Really, really deeply appreciate it. So excited for next week. And thank you for attending today,
Yeah.
Bas.
Same time.
All
Looking
right.
forward to it.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye all.
thank you all.
God bless you.
Bye.
Day or night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.